Hello everyone, welcome to Mythstory, the show where we talk about myths from around the globe. For today's show, we're going to talk about one of the most diverse and oldest religions in the world, Celtic mythology. Just like most of the European religions during the Iron Age, the Celtic religion was polytheistic. The names of over 200 gods have been recorded. But it's likely that many of them went under multiple names, so there were probably less than this. With the Celts spreading across Europe, they came in contact with many other groups, including the Romans. The Celtic religion didn't survive the Roman Empire. With the Christianization of the Celtic people and the loss of their language over time, the belief system left all but a trace. The only evidence of what they believed comes from monks, historians, and in some cases even rulers, but not from the Celts themselves. This makes this a very different video from the rest in this series. The stories may have been altered over time, and many of the myths have surely been lost. On top of that, since the religion was so widespread, many variations on the religion existed depending on area. There are Gaelic myths, Welsh myths, Irish myths, and many more. They really just share core concepts, and the rest of the myths seem to be later additions. I will do my best to go over the oldest versions of these myths. So let's begin from the beginning. Creation. Celtic mythology does not propose a single version or description of the creation as a whole, as other religions and mythologies do. Rather, the beliefs about the creation are scattered. Giants were regarded as the ancient original gods. The tale is related that in the first winter, an enormous, powerful giant was created from hoarfrost. Fire came and then melted the giant. The remnants of his body formed the various parts of our universe. The giant's body formed the world. His blood flowed freely, creating the seas and oceans. The mountains were created from his bones. The forests and trees sprung from his hair, and his skull became the sky. In the core of the earth, the gods were thought to live on mountainous hills. And below in the valleys, the underworld boiled with secrets and was the home of the dead. The following passage is from a Celtic myth claiming that in the beginning, nothing living existed, not even gods, but that the earth was comprised of land and sea. Once upon a time, there was no time, and that was when there was also no gods and no man walked among the surface of the land. But there was sea, and where the sea met the land, a mare was born, white and made of sea foam, and her name was Yoka. Creation continues on. From an oak tree that grew in the land there sprouted a plant. This is where Yoka gave birth to the first god, Cernunnos. Cernunnos mated with Yoka and begat more gods. However, the gods felt lonely because they did not have anyone to command or to worship them. So from the wood of the oak tree they created the first man and woman, as well as other animals. Giants too are born from the bark of a tree that Yoka hurled into the water. Nothing more specific can be found, and as the exact origins of the stories above are not known, it is unclear whether they are original stories or later inventions. As most Celtic myths were once only preserved orally, later Christian influences may have altered and distorted them. How Citta No won the name of Cuchulainn. Cuchulainn was a legendary hero of Ireland. According to the stories, he knew of his supernatural powers since the age of 6. He was known to do incredible feats like slay monsters and single-handedly defeat armies, but for this video, we will only be covering one of his many legendary exploits. Long ago, there existed an elite group of boy athletes named the Boy Corps. Its members consisted of the sons of chieftains and princes, having proved their strength in a series of challenges. Before Citta had grown to the age of 6, he had expressed interest in joining the Boy Corps. At first, King Conchobar refused to take the request seriously, but Citta persisted and he was allowed to join in a game of hurling one morning. A team of 12 boys was assembled to play against him. They laughed and mocked him, thinking this would be an easy victory. As soon as the game started, Citta lunged into the group of boys after the ball and hit it with immense force. The ball effortlessly flew into their goal. After that, Citta made it impossible for the 12 to reach the ball, and within a matter of minutes he had scored 50 goals. The crowd looked on in amazement, and the king had Citta brought to him so he could give him a reward. The game had not even ended yet. On this day, the king had been invited to attend a banquet with the greatest craftsmen in the region. Conchobar knew that no one of the boy's age had ever attended this banquet with the king and the Knights of the Red Guard, so he thought this would be a fitting reward. Citta would have loved to accept this invitation, but there was one thing holding him back. He wanted to finish the game. He told the king that he had enjoyed the first half of the game so much he would hate to have to leave it unfinished, and he would join the king just as soon as the game was done. The king agreed and gave the boy directions. He set off to the banquet with hopes of telling all the guests what he had seen. The king arrived at the house and took a seat at the head of the table. Culann, the craftsman, looked around to make sure all the guests had arrived. He told the king that it was time for the feast to begin since everyone was there. The king had forgotten that he had invited Citta, and the feast began. Along with the feast came Culann's hound, who would guard the palace. This hound was unmatched by any other in the region, and even 100 men could not take it down. The feast had begun just as Citta was making his way to the gates. With him, he brought the hurley and the ball from his victory. When he was approaching, the hound began to bark and could be heard throughout the entire countryside. Everyone in the house went outside to see what it was that riled up the hound. There they saw Citta standing without fear. The hound leaped at him, and Citta shoved the ball down the hound's throat. And as the hound was choking, he grabbed its hind legs and smashed its head against the rocks until it was dead. The king was pleased with the boy's strength and courage, but Culann could not get over the death of his beloved hound. Citta went up to Culann and told him that he would find a new hound and raise it to be just as powerful as the one Culann had lost. But in the meantime, he would be there to guard the palace, just as the hound had done. Appreciating this gesture, Culann suggested the boy be called Cuchulainn, Culann's hound, in remembrance of the boy's first great act of valor. It was by this name he was known and feared for the rest of his days. The Daughter of Dewart. There once was a man, Maclean of Dewart. He loved his daughter very much, so he sent her away to be a scholar. This was unheard of for a girl in those days, but her father was able to get the money, and she was away for 4 years. While he was gone, Maclean was lonely, so he sat in her room looking at pictures and books reminiscing. One day, she came back and the father was ecstatic. He wanted to know everything she had learned while she was away, and he took her up to a hill where they could talk. She looked out to the sea and saw a ship going away from them. She told her father that she had learned how to make the ship come to shore. The father laughed and said, "Well, bring her in then." The ship turned and made its way towards them, heading right for the rocks. It kept coming with no signs of slowing down. Finally, the father said, "Save them now. Why don't you save them now?" The girl turned to him with a sinister smile and said, "I don't know how to do that." There was a brief silence, but it was quickly filled by the sounds of crashing and the screams of dying men. He turned to his daughter with new eyes and told her that he would rather have an empty room than her company. He went into the house and built a great fire, and when his daughter walked in, he cut her to pieces and threw her in. He went into her room, gathered her things, and began throwing them all into the raging flames. He had thought so highly of her that he could not stand the idea of practicing black magic, and she had mastered it. Celtic mythology is a lost treasure of the world. Imagine the amazing stories we could have had if the oral tradition were not lost in history. Thanks for watching this episode of Mythstory on Celtic mythology. Make sure to like and subscribe, and tell us what mythology you want us to cover next in the comments below. And if you really love us, consider supporting us on Patreon and checking out our new website, MilwaukeeAtheists.com. We also have an official merch store where you can buy classic Milwaukee Atheist garb. We'll see you next time.